We have 11 participants.
Okay, there we go then. So, hello, Grandma. I guess there's lots of grandmas here. We haven't seen you in a while.
I just forgot last time, and my little one's coming on Thursday, so I'm going to see him again.
Whoa, which one?
The youngest one from the one whose daddy is a pilot.
Oh.
But anyway, I can't wait for this. I'm looking forward to it.
There you go. Good stuff. All right, folks. So this is the first time through this. So I've done little bits of, I'm not that new to teaching, but I have not played around on Zoom and tutorials and all of that. So the way I'm going to play this morning is a couple of you did send in images, but I'm going to play with a couple of mine too. But first of that, I want to talk a little bit about philosophy and mindset, because that was really what triggered this whole conversation about post-processing and different approaches to it. And so I guess I should share. Let me pull up my slides. Share screen. Okay. Well, there's a good start. Hang on, let me just see why I am not getting either my slides. There we go. I should have slides and I should have Lightroom. Okay, let's try this evolution again, was what we used to say in the Navy when it all went pear-shaped. There we go. Okay. Microsoft PowerPoint presentation. That's what I want to share, but it would have been better had I been prepared. Here we go. So you guys see that?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So, I mean, it's worth saying that before we dive into this, I look at a lot of tutorials, particularly, you know, YouTube is pretty good nowadays, but there are other places out there. And I think what I did was take a framework, you know, so when I started seriously getting into this post-processing, then I looked at a lot of stuff and I found an approach that sort of spoke to me and said, this seems like a sensible way to start to do things. And I can relate to it, and I think I can apply that. But then over the years, you know, you amend it in all sorts of ways. So when I go back and look at my catalog, I can see, for example, how my naming approach to photographs has changed over the years. And so it is with many aspects of that. Plus, of course, some of the tools keep changing. So Lightroom is, if you're in the subscription service I use the desktop classic, it's called now, or not, whatever. They change the damn name every 3 months, it seems to me. There's a lot of new stuff coming out. So there is now color grading in there, which I have played with a little, and I have to say I haven't yet got to grips with. Every time I try to do, one of my heroes is Michael Fry. I know some of you have seen some of the stuff I've posted from him. And he has a great class, which I bought, and I've tried it, and I watch him do stuff, and I can't make it work the same way, but I can't work out why yet. So, you know, this is not like fully baked, hey, this is the only way to do it. This is the amalgam of things that I've collected over a bunch of years in post-processing, and many, many bruises, you know, as it says here. So with that, I want to just talk a little first before we dive into actually processing. And I want to encourage you to approach your images and look at each one and really ask yourself the question, what am I trying to say with this image? Sometimes I'm trying to recreate what I believe I saw when I was in the field. Sometimes I'm trying to create an effect that's not necessarily what you would call photorealistic, but it conveys the feeling and the impressions that I want to convey with this particular image. And I suspect that we all sort of do that, but it's really, really tempting to dive in. And I'm going to say to you, hold off a moment and just sit back and think, And then one of the key messages that I think it took me a while to get was your image, whatever you do with it, wherever you publish it or, you know, put it out there, whether it's to family or on some critique website, your image goes out into the world without you. And what do I mean when I say that? Well, for most of us, when we're working on an image, it gives us some sort of flashbacks to where we were, how we felt in that moment, what we took from the environment around us. And particularly if it's a memory type of image, you know, portrait or family or kids or grandkids or whatever, there's a huge emotional element to what appears to be a simple picture. But when it goes out to somebody else, when you send me your pictures, for example, for the challenges, they come to me and I have no context. I have no emotion. I have nothing except the image that I'm looking at there and then in the moment. And I think that's important because it's hard to detach ourselves from the emotional content of an image in whatever context, yeah? But that's exactly what our viewer does. Our viewer comes to it and sees only what we give them. And I think that that's a really important concept, that bit about what am I trying to say, and my image is going out there without any of the context and emotion that I had in both taking or making and then post-processing. So those two things, I think, if you can start to think in that way and really at least run a mental checklist when you start to work on your images that include those two things, I think it helps me step back and it may help you. So having said that, when those of us who go down to the dam and take, you know, thousands of images on high-speed capture, each image is an individual. So I'm going to push you in two directions here. It's really weird because I'm going to insist to you that each image is an individual and join, you know, encourage you to avoid rote processing. But then there is a bunch of automation that you can help, that can really help you. So if you, for example, underexposed 50 images that you shot on, then you can change the exposure on all of them simultaneously in many tools. And much of what I'm talking about today, I'm trying to talk in a general sense rather than be specific to a particular tool that I happen to use. So do use automation, and I'll come back to that a little later when we start to look at how to make things work. And your job is really to lead the viewer. You're going to give the viewer an image. You already have some idea on what you want them to take away, but then your job is to lead them through the image. And I've said this many, many times, and I'll keep doing it, I guess. Your viewer is generally going to go to the brightest, the sharpest, and the highest contrast item. And I know I've said that many times, but today we're going to talk a little bit more subtly about that, because you go to the brightest and the sharpest and the contrastiest. And the inverse is also true, that you tend not to go to the least, but there are gradations in that. And we'll talk about those gradations today when we want to lead. So we can apply something fully or in part, some effect fully or in part, or grade it depending on where we want to take the viewer. And those concepts are important. But of course, I guess you all know that as soon as you put something red in an image, you know, all bets are off sort of thing. They're going to go to the red straight away, unless you choose to route them in a different way. But those are not a bad set of simple rules: brightest, sharpest, and contrastiest. And we'll build on that as we go through the morning. So somebody asked about image formats. Oh, actually, I was talking to Betty last week when we were at the dam, and Betty asked specifically, and it struck me that we have a lot of conversations about image formats, and I'm not sure how thoroughly we understand them. Nobody, for example, has sent me a raw image in this for this input. In those of you, Bill, has the stuff gone out yet for the post-processing challenge or not?
No, because
Okay.
we're mentioning it here and then send it out.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So some of you will know, we've talked about this before, that we're going to have a post-processing challenge coming up where we send out some images to you in a number of different formats, and you get to play with it. You will see that image later today. And I would really, really, really encourage you to process in RAW whenever you can. A, shoot in RAW, and B, process in RAW. The philosophy here is keep the maximum number of options for as long through the workflow pipeline as you can. So that means, you know, if I've got a lot of bit depth, keep it for as long as you can, because more bit depth gives you more options to really massage it without damaging, quotes, the image. And so I'd encourage you to shoot RAW. I needed a lot of persuading, and it was only in a group of peers late one night on San Francisco Bay where they jeered at me for so long for shooting JPEGs that I actually gave in. And ever after that, there are times when JPEG shooting is appropriate. And I have used it, and I do use it once in a while, but mainly I would shoot RAW. And each camera manufacturer has its own proprietary format, and some of the abbreviations you see up there, those are the, you know, the three after the dot and the file name. CR2 and CR3 are Canon format.
Graham,
Yeah.
the PowerPoint isn't open.
Yeah, we're not seeing anything but the index.
Oh, it's showing here. You're not seeing anything at all?
We just see
Oh.
your index.
It says sharing is paused. Bring your window to the front. Okay, what's happening here? Well, oh, resume share. Oh, come on. I've got a button here that says resume share, and it's doing nothing. I'm going to stop it and restart it. How about that? So let us try this. This is what 40 years in IT gives you. Okay, PowerPoint, share.
There you go.
Okay. Did you say, where did you lose that?
We never had it.
Oh, really? You didn't have any?
No,
You haven't had any of this?
No.
correct.
Oh, okay. You guys are slow at shouting. Be quicker. All right. Well, I'll run through those. So this is where we were. We were talking about RAW, and then and that to me is the most desirable format. So I would encourage you to try it. It is bigger. It takes up more room on your disk. I know all of that, but it's really worth. The benefits are significant.
Graham,
Yeah.
Susan, one of the problems I have is my email will only send a 20 meg maximum for a picture. So Tom and I were trying to exchange a raw file and we couldn't. So I don't know if that's going to be an issue as far as sending in raw images, but that's just something to put in the back. For some reason, my email won't send an image larger than 20 megs. So.
Was it you that emailed me saying that? Somebody emailed me saying that.
No, I didn't email you saying that.
Okay, somebody, and I can't remember who, obviously, emailed talking about that very issue, and it seemed to come down to, or at least the guilty party looked like Gmail. I don't have this problem, and I have had plenty of images emailed to me. The other thing, of course, is, you know, you can always send a link to something like Dropbox or iCloud or whichever system you use, and that can work okay too.
Graham,
Yeah.
can I ask a favor? Because you're recording this, can you go back and just briefly put up each of your slides?
I just did that, but I can do it again.
Oh, but they went by really fast. Could you like give them just like a second?
You want more than a second?
Yes,
There'll be an extra charge for that.
I'm a visual person. Yeah,
Okay, so we started there. We talked
Yeah.
a lot about philosophy, which is that slide.
that's
And then
great.
We're on to image formats.
Great. Thank you.
And I'll send you the extra bill.
Okay.
Okay, so
Well, Graham, on the sending raw files,
Mhm.
I don't think it can be an image size, because most raw files, at least in my experience, are smaller than ones that get manipulated, and you try to do them as even a big JPEG.
Right.
So I don't think it's a size issue.
Well, actually with Tom was sending me a raw file that was more than 20 meg and I couldn't email, I was trying to email it to myself and I couldn't. So I don't know. That's what I saw. And
Yeah,
yes, anyway.
I think there's nothing inherently that prevents them being emailed. It's probably the carrier or the email client that you're using. So I would definitely check that out first.
Yeah, well, it
In
said
Email,
with
in
my
Gmail, it's 35 megabytes. And I think you and I were talking about that down at the dam.
Right.
And that it really is, if we can maybe even address that at another time, just how do we get around, especially if we're not using the cloud? I mean, do we have to use a cloud to do this?
Dropbox or something.
Well, something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's an email provider restriction. Some of that stuff goes back to, the start of email, literally, where they used to have very heavy restrictions because systems were not particularly strong in the early days. But most people have removed those limits now. But it's definitely not an issue to do with the image. It's to do with the email client stroke system that you're using. So the only alternative that I know of is something like, choose your Dropbox, iCloud, Microsoft OneDrive, and share a link. That works. So back to this guy. So the final thing I want to say about RAW that I think is an important concept that's not always well understood is people talk about sending a RAW image. You can't. There is no image. It is a series of data streams directly from the sensor. Every time that you open a RAW image, it needs to be post-processed in order to generate pixels that you and I can see. So the way I like to think about that is that it's closer to being an undeveloped film than it is an image. There's a latent image there, but you can't actually look at it. If you just try and view the file, on most desktop systems nowadays, if you look at the file, you can actually get an image. You can't do that with a RAW unless there's a RAW processor built into the operating environment. So I think that's a good way to think about that. And then the final RAW format is non-proprietary, in quotes, in that DNG, which is an abbreviation for digital negative, is an Adobe proprietary format, but they've published the specs for it. And I and many others convert everything to DNG as part of my import process. So I throw away the original images once I've got a DNG, and I work in DNG. And there are a number of good reasons for doing that. And there are a couple of reasons that might cause you to pause. One is they're bigger than some other files. So they're bigger than JPEGs often, for example. So moving on to what I would call real image formats, we have two main ones that are in use today. There are a bunch of others for various specialized purposes, but as far as we're concerned as image makers, the two that we really run across a lot are TIFF, which should be TIFF, tiled image file format, I believe. No, tagged image file format. That's correct. Which actually is just the same as a PSD image. The TIFF format is owned by Adobe, as is the PSD format. There are good reasons for using that, primarily that you can produce a 16-bit image. Plus, if you save a TIFF, it's generally not compressed. You can compress TIFFs, but by default, it does not compress. JPEG, which is what we see everywhere and is effectively the lowest common denominator. And I'll talk a little, we're not going to talk much about color space today, but JPEG with the web browser system that was in use with sRGB is really the lowest common denominator that was developed so that we could look at images on the web. And we've really stuck to that, and it's given us a lot of problems. So JPEG is 8-bit only, and it is compressed. And I want to talk about one particular thing. So if you really took on board those lessons that whoever gave you your image processing lessons talked about, which is, you know, constantly save your work. If you do that with the JPEG, you are killing your images. Resaving the same image over and over again is recompressing it over and over again. If you save it to a different name, and then you've only got the single compression. So I use TIFF and JPEG only as output formats for doing something else. And we'll talk a little bit about that later too. But any questions on this? Because this is one of those fundamentals that I know a number of people have asked me about.
I have a question about, could you explain the DNG again? I didn't quite understand that.
DNG is, so all the formats on the top line up here are camera manufacturer specific. So Canon, Nikon, or Nikon. I can't remember whose ARW is. Is that Sony? ORF is Olympus, I think, and so on and so forth. And most of them have their own. DNG is not written by a camera manufacturer. It was produced by Adobe. And so to some degree, it's independent. And some of us use it as a means of storing a camera or proprietary independent means of storing raw images. The other thing that happens, of course, is that Adobe particularly will not write to CR2, CR3s, NEFs, etc., because they are proprietary. And there is a whole debate, or was many years ago, about whether you're breaking copyright in writing back into a CR2, for example. And now Adobe, if you force it to, will change the date in an image, but I believe that's as far as they'll go. So DNG, if you will, it is more neutral. It's in the it's not in the public domain, that it is made publicly available for any image processing tools or cameras to implement. Okay, anything else?
About formats, where can I find out more about the HEIC format that smartphones use?
Well, that's one of those new formats that's coming along. There's still, so I forget what it is. HEIC is, I believe, I'm not sure whether it's an Apple or Apple led.
Yeah, it's like high efficiency image format.
That's it, thank you. It's starting to appear. It's a bit of a pain in the backside because not everybody supports it yet. So for example, when I move my iPhone images, I drop them onto my desktop. This is an iMac that we're using here. They appear as HEIC images, and of course I can't put them onto Facebook, for example. I have to open them and so on. So I have a little, well, theoretically I have a Photoshop droplet that I just drop them onto and it converts them to a JPEG. I mean, they are supported, Adobe supports it, but most of the web viewers still don't. Most of the web viewers will only support JPEG, PNG, GIF, and so on. Some will support TIFF, but yeah, we're not going to talk about color spaces today. Color space is a whole other different thing. But anyway, I want to, good. Has that answered everybody's questions?
If you could say one more time about the, I guess the term is lossiness of JPEGs. What exactly, if I move it from my post-processing back to my storage and then from my storage back over to post-processing, is that a loss process?
No, it's only when you save it, not when you move it. And so the
Okay.
problem really occurs is if you open a JPEG in your editing tool, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and then you save it. So let's assume, you know, I make this change, and because I've been well drilled, after every change I save it. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Yeah. Each save is a compression. And so you end up compressing the compressed that's compressed that's compressed.
Well, what if I do it as a save as?
Save as and give it a different name is fine. That's what I was advocating, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
What about if
Okay.
you duplicate the photo, duplicate it and then work with the two photos?
That works too, but don't repeatedly save it.
Okay, but as long as they're duplicated, they're still at the same.
Yeah, it's only the save that does the compression. So,
Okay.
and it's inherent. You can't not do it. That's the issue with JPEG, is that every time it's saved, it applies the compression.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. All right, let's move on. Okay, the next big set of concepts I want to talk to you about, and this one comes up regularly in the conversations, is the difference between meta editors and pixel editors. And meta editors are things like Lightroom, Photos on the Mac, Affinity, I believe, is a meta editor, although I have it, but I don't use it much. And things like Photoshop and GIMP. And what's the one you use, Bill?
Well, I've been using Photoshop Elements.
Thank you, Elements. These are all pixel editors. And yes, I know there are ways to mitigate changing pixels, like using layers and so on and so forth. And they're all good things. But the base difference is that a pixel editor is you are physically changing the pixels. Don't you like my little hammer and chisel here? That's what that means. It means you're changing pixels. You can revert by using, to some degree, by using multiple copies that we just talked about, you know, save as, but it's more difficult. And they do have their place. Pixel editors are good for some things, but not for everything. So let's come back to meta editors, which is in general where the photo processing world is headed. It's not all there, but most of the big tools nowadays aim to be a meta editor. And I know, looking around here, everybody knows what an overhead projector is. Yeah, you remember? You remember those things? And do you remember
Way
what we
back
used
when.
to do? We used to put a transparency on it, yeah?
Yes.
And then those of you who've taught will remember we put a piece of paper on top to hide the stuff that we didn't want the students to see, yeah? Or we could put a frame on to hide part of it. And that's exactly the right model, at least in my mind, to think about the way a meta editor works, is you put your base image up there, which is effectively, I'm arguing, your raw file gets sucked in, it turns it into pixels and it puts it on the slide projector. And then when we put a crop on, we're not actually not changing those pixels at all. What we're doing is putting a mask on top. And so you end up with a big stack of changes. And you'll see that in a minute. You'll see that stack physically represented as the change history. So you can crop, we change the exposure, clarity, whatever it is we want to do. This ends up as a big pile on top of that image of changes that we want to apply. Those changes are all temporary. They're ephemeral until we do something to bake that image. And baking, I mean here, is we're fixing it in some permanent form. Not the one that we've got in our image editor, but we have to put it out. And the two big ways to put it out, of course, are to save as or to export as a JPEG or a TIFF or whatever we want. And the other one is to print it. Those are the two most common methods. But we can go back at every stage. Even after we've saved that one, we can go back and make some changes to any of those items in the layer. And that's the beauty of a meta editor. We can always go back. And in fact, I will do some of the major editing that we're going to talk about today by doing that, I'm going to revert it to the original form of the image, and then I'm going to step through each of those steps and show you what we did and why. Make sense?
Yes, excellent.
Good. Okay, so it should go without saying, I think, I'm a big advocate of meta editors. I'm an advocate of pixel editing when you need to use pixel editing. Okay, so when we get an image, we're going to do some stuff. First of all, I mentioned automation earlier and said treat each image as its own, but that doesn't mean you don't use automation. So on import processing, for example, if you're using Lightroom, you can apply copyrights. I can do import processing actually by camera and by lens combination if I wish. I can set those up and I can say, if it's this camera, then do it this way. So those are pretty useful when you're importing high volumes of images and getting them into your tool. Again, I use Lightroom for the first time. And simple things like lens profiles. I'll show you a lens profile change in Lightroom as part of what we're doing today. And those things are really important. And if you get them set up, you know, like your copyright statement is always there. It's never on the machine I want, but you know, you can set it up as a template, and then it's just applied automatically as part of your import routine. So that's really a sort of, you know, a memory jogger. But then when I look at an image, the first thing I want to say is, bearing in mind all the stuff we've talked about what am I trying to achieve with my image? What are the big issues? What are the big things in this image that I'm looking at that I need to fix? And we're going to apply, in general, a methodology of saying, what do we want to do globally? What do we want to do locally? So we work from the big issues that we do to the image as a whole, and we get smaller and smaller or more local with the changes as we evolve towards our finished image. So some of the big things that I always want to look at is the exposure correct? Is it where I need it to be? How do I have good black and white points? So if you have a very gray day, you probably don't have a good black point, and you might want to change that. You probably would. We want as full a range image as we can get. You might want to crop. You might want to sharpen. And we're going to talk a little bit more about sharpening in a moment, but what we're talking about here, when we talk about global sharpening at this stage, is we're talking about making up for deficiencies in the camera's sensor. All camera sensors produce a softer image, except for builds that doesn't have an anti-aliasing filter, I think. Most of them have a filter in front that has a tendency to soften the image a little bit. Not much, and they're getting better, by the way. So we used to have to do post-capture sharpening on every image. Nowadays, not so much, but we need to look at it. There are, however, and I'll talk about this in more depth in a minute, 3 forms of sharpening. So we're talking only here about post-capture, that is making up for any shortcomings in the sensor sharpness in capturing. I'll talk about selective and I'll talk about output later. So, and then once we've done all our global changes, so we've got our exposure right, we know what we're trying to do here, then we'll start doing local changes, and I'll talk a bit and show you in a few moments. And one of the things that I always like to go back and say, because I'm lazy, is I often apply things to the whole image, and then I go, well, is that really what I'm trying to say? Is that really what I want to do? Do I really want to change the hue and saturation for the whole image? Or do I want to only do it on this red that's distracting over here? Do I only want to downplay that a little and leave the rest of the image like it is? So there's a sort of process that I would go through of saying, did I really want to do all of that before I move on and start really digging into the image? And as with most things in image making, many of these things are iterative. So for example, we might set our exposure and choose where we want that, and then go and say, okay, well, that's moved my black point. I've got to go back and change my black point or my white point, or it's moved, you know, the highlights and so on and so forth. And so you might need to go around a few times, and you'll see that happen a couple of times in some of these images, depending on how far we get today. So that's it. Any questions on that? Good, you lot are easily pleased. So I want to do a specific on sharpening, because again, I think this is not well understood. And this is the way I learned to do it a long time ago. But each one is specific, and each has a particular need and a particular purpose. And we don't use it in the wrong way, as it were. So for capture sharpening, it's generally the whole image that we're trying to deal with. And I talked already to that, why we do that, so I'm not going to go over that again. But selective sharpening is when we want to, you know, we talked about that brightest, sharpest, contrastiest. This is where we come in with what we call selective sharpening. So who can give me a good example of where you might want to selectively sharpen something?
Draw attention to it.
Say that again?
You want to draw attention to a particular thing.
That would work. That would work. And what about
bow tie?
No, I think that's how it's wrong. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. You want to draw attention to it. So if I'm looking at something like a portrait of an attractive woman or man, particularly, well, we'll come back to it, women in portraiture in a minute. But for example, I almost always want to sharpen the eyes. But particularly if it's a woman, you rarely want to sharpen the skin. Women do not like photographers who sharpen their skin. I can tell you this, yeah? And in fact, I mentioned here, emphasize or not, there might be times when you want to downplay or soften the image rather than sharpen it. And women's skin is often one of those examples. And you may not use sharpening. You might use, for example, if you have a system that has a clarity slider, negative clarity is great for that sort of thing. But you need to think about how you're going to apply a selective sharpening. And we use something, I tend to use something called an image map, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Beth's already seen this. I'm going to use one of Beth's images in a minute. And then the final area of sharpening is output sharpening. That is when we're baking this image. We want to make it right for the viewer to see. And that's going to depend hugely on the size of the image and the media to which it's going. So if you're doing a big print, you would be amazed at the amount of sharpening you're going to throw at it. You also throw different amounts of sharpening when you're printing for glossy and you're printing for matte, because the ink's going to sit differently. So those are all, and we're not going to talk much about that today, but it does apply when you're exporting your images. You know, do you sharpen for desktop viewing? Do you sharpen more or less? And some of the tools just give you simple options and some don't. So learn your tool. Okay, local changes. We talked a little bit about that. Things like spot removal, and we're going to look at that again today. Luminosity we've talked about, you know, do we make it brighter or darker to emphasize or de-emphasize? Do we increase the contrast or reduce it? Selective sharpening we just talked about. And I mentioned negative sharpening. That can be important. And color, you know, so this is where I mentioned earlier, you know, that I have a nasty habit of applying global changes to color when I really should have been doing selective color changing, because it's harder. You've got to select it, you've got to make sure it's right, and so on and so forth. But these are the sorts of things that we do. So we're always going from that global perspective down to, as it were, smaller and smaller areas. Make sense?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So let's talk about image maps. This is an image that Beth sent me and said, hey, what do you think? So we had a conversation about it. And one of the things I suggested was that we put together an image map. So you know, when I look at an image like this, and I think what I said to Beth, she's probably going to call me now because I can't remember what I said properly. But there's a lot of similar tones in here. So how do I direct the viewer's eye? Where do I want them to look? Which are the better parts of the photograph that I want them to concentrate on? Which bits are distracting? So I might think, for example, that this brighter area up here is a little bit distracting, when actually I want the viewer to look at this fabulous image down here, but it's darker than that is. So how am I going to deal with all of this as an image? So what we do is, and this is a technique that I stole from Vincent Versace, and you can, I do physically do this sometimes if it's an important image. And really what I'm talking about here is I take this image, or I take the sample image into Photoshop and I draw a map on it on a different layer, or 3 different layers, depending on what I want to do. And so you can see, you know, to some degree, this is self-explanatory. This is the bit where I want the viewer to go first. And so this is going to be brighter. It's going to be sharper. It's going to have a little more contrast. It might have a little more color boost. And then these secondary or supporting flowers here, I might do 75%. Down here, I really want these guys out of the equation around the edges. So my starting point in terms of thinking for them is 50. And then I see this obnoxious leaf over here that is going to grab attention, and I want to darken that. Now, these are all starting points. So this is my thought when I look at the image. When I go and process it, I might change my mind. I might vary this, and these numbers are not absolute. You know, this might end up being 80 or 50 or 60 or whatever it is, and these might end up being lower. I want it, but I'm starting to get a feel of the differences that I want in the image and where I go. And that's what the one that I played with came out like. And I still didn't do a best job on this. So I still don't, you know, this is okay. You can see that it's cropped. I got rid of a lot of the brightness up here by cropping. And then I applied those techniques that I just showed you on the image map here. So in general, that's the philosophy and the thought process that I'm going to go through. Questions? I think that's the end of the slides. Yep. So questions, comments, and then we're going to go live. This is where it gets fun. You're all stunned into silence, huh?
Stunned
Okay.
is the right word. Yeah, let's go.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing that one, and I am going to share Lightroom Classic GBB Master. There you go. Oh, look, I haven't drunk my tea. So these are the images we have, and I think some of you are playing with me. So I'm going to take Miss Akiba to task to start for sending me an almost perfect image and saying, what are you going to do with this then? Betty, your red star's been removed. Your gold star's been removed. Betty sent me this one. I am sharing. See, and I look at that and I go, okay, there might be a few nuances, but in general, that's an image that you know, it's up there. So let's get into it. And I'm using keystrokes here. I'm not going to explain a lot about what I'm doing. So I'm going to work on a couple of images. And these are all, well, I don't know. Okay, I have my fancy pen. So here I'm using a pen and a pad. So I changed my layout. I moved my keyboard to one side because again, I'm too lazy to set, whoops. I'm too lazy to set up this tablet with the keystrokes on here. I will do it one day. It's on my to-do list. It's like my books to be read. Yeah. So, and now, there we go. Now it's woken up. So let's look at this guy here. So I'm going to take that image. I'm going to press the D key, which puts me into develop mode. And then I mentioned that list of changes. You see on this left-hand side over here, here's the history.
Yeah, we don't
Not
see.
seeing it. See the image, but not the panel.
We're not seeing the history.
You're not seeing the whole screen?
It was there a minute ago, but now it's not.
Uh,
And Graham, you started with a landscape, and now it's a portrait view of something, of a water, a stream. So is it on the right image?
yeah, it's oh, no, this is going to mess it. I don't understand why this is happening. I am screen sharing. Well,
We're seeing the image, and then on each side is a gray panel and nothing in it.
well, how about
Nothing
that?
in.
Did that make any difference?
No.
Are you, can you see my cursor?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, we can see that.
But you can't see it now.
yeah, we can.
And there's nothing under it?
No,
That's correct. Can you slide it out?
Well, I just tried that. I just moved it as far as it'll go. Hell, that's going to mess things up.
Is it helpful to know that it says library at the top, but you want it to be in develop? And if you're in develop, we can
I
see
am
all
in
the
develop.
options, but we can't see those.
Really? Oh, how weird. Thank you for that. So you're still seeing library up here?
Yes.
Yeah,
Not develop.
right.
Well, I have no explanation for that, but let's try it. You know, computers can never win. So let's try. I've gone into develop and we'll share this. Oh,
There we go.
That's it.
even I got the panels?
Yes.
How bloody odd.
Oh, we,
Okay, good.
We've got your studio now, or whatever you call it, in Lightroom.
Okay, so you can see that image and you can see this side panel.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So on the left here is the history. This is you remember the overhead transparency analogy that I used? This is it. And if I go back to, this is the first, now I've got these things messed up. Oh, there we go. So the first thing I've done is I've clicked right down at the bottom and I've gone to the original imported version. This is it. And the first thing you're going to notice is that if you're a Lightroom user, this panel over here is a really old version. So Lightroom thinks it's being smart. It processes it pulls the image up in the version that it was originally imported in. And this is really old. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to change the version to the current one. Now you have to do this with care, particularly if you've processed your images. Yeah, I knew that was going to happen. And you would change it to version 5 here, right? I don't want to lose all my edits. So I've updated to the current process version. Now, interestingly enough, I am not seeing, okay, I'm switching on the highlights. So the J key for me, do you now see that I've got highlights in this stream?
yeah,
So, you know, the first thing we talked about was, is the exposure okay? And so on and so forth. So I'm going to fix those highlights. And then you can see up here that I've got a decent black point and a decent white point. I may decide that I want to crop it. And that's what I did. So if I choose let's go back here. I've done that. I've changed the crop angle. I'm trying to work left-handed here. That's not working too well. And I'm going to change it. I'm going to decide on the crop that I want. I'm going to move that. I didn't like all of this distraction down here. And the tree adds nothing. And I particularly find this distracting down here. So I wanted to remove that. And I did that with a crop, didn't like the first crop, yeah, and I keep working. So I'm keeping moving until I get to a point that I decide I'm happy with. And then I'm going to lock that in. Now, what did I do next? So the question is, I think we went up and selected this tool, and then I'm going to add a brush stroke. Now, there is also an overlay that is really, really useful. Have I got it? Where's my overlay gone? I'm trying to decide which I did here, and I don't remember. So we're going to work through, and then I'm going to look. I'm trying to work out where the damn brushes are, and I can't see it coming up. So I know it's not displaying to you. And then I'm going to go and check that my exposure hasn't changed. And I do that with these guys up here, the high point and the low point. And then I'm going to change that. There we go. Sorry, you can't go away. Thank you. There we go. You can see just a modest change. And then I'm going to play, I didn't like the shadows. So to me, the shadows are too dark here. So I'm going to use this slider here, and I'm going to change it and push the shadows to the right. And I still wasn't happy. So I changed a little bit more. And what I'm trying to do all the time is work so that the image gets more to the sort of vision that I wanted to see. I'm going to update now. So I did some changes, and then do you see what's happening over here on the left? I've now got this indication that my black point is clipping. So I'm going to want to change this black point here, which I did like that. And now we've got it back. So we've got the detail back in these shadows here. I'm not going to deal with the brush strokes. So now I want to make a change to clarity. And clarity is going to push all the mid-range contrast, which is really what I want to see. I want to see a lot more detail in here if I can. I'm going to update the clarity, and you should see that. Can you see that change happen?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, cool. So now I'm seeing a lot more detail in here. But what I've done is I've pushed the whites further than I want them to. So I'm going to do the white adjustment using the white slider here. And I'm going to keep going, and the highlights too. So there's the clarity, there's the whites, and you can see that now I've got this little bit creeping in where the whites are blown out. So I'm going to use the highlights to pull that back. And then I'm going to add a little bit of contrast. And now I'm getting sort of happier, but I want to change that crop again. And I'm trying to move things so that this is less obtrusive. That's good. We've got it with clarity. And then I can also deal with these guys by adding a post-crop vignette, which I did. So do you see the difference? It just drops those down a little bit. And then now let's see if I can remember what I did here. So now up to now we've been playing with global. Now we're going to start playing with some of the more local enhancements. And in particular, I find these branches distracting. I find this guy up here. So I've done my edge patrol, and I see this guy up here, and I go, don't like that. Still not happy with this down here. And the vignette's done some, but not as much as I would like. So now I have to see if I can make this work properly. I believe that this is the brush stroke. Okay, so you see the little pin come up here. This is the brush stroke. And if I want to see what that's doing, why is my overlay key not working? My overlay key doesn't seem to be working. So I think this is doing this one here. It might be doing more. Why the hell? Well, I should be getting an orange mask on here, which is supposed to show you what happens and what I was adjusting. And then, oh, there we go. Now I've got an overlay mask in. You see it coming in here. and then I'm adding, refining the brush strokes. So I did this guy up here, I've done this guy here. This guy over here is just on, and then this guy here. So those are the ones that I thought were a little bit obtrusive. If we turn off the overlay key, and now you can see what we did with them. And did you see them go dark? I changed the local exposure only for those bits that are highlighted. And then we're switching that off. And then I still don't like this guy up here. So I think the next one I did, we chose spot removal, which is a bit misleading in this case, but I think it goes up here and we should see.
Graham?
Yeah.
It's Leslie. Can you make your cursor a little bit bigger? I'm having trouble following it.
I can't.
I mean, if it's a hassle, don't worry about it. But
yeah,
I
don't know how I can do that without.
Okay, never mind then.
Everything.
That's okay. If it was an easy fix, it would have been great, but that's all right. Don't worry about it.
There you go. No problem. So,
well, hey, Graham, while we're stopped, why don't you eliminate those branches?
Well, just watch. Well, so these guys, because that's a huge amount of work. This chap, funny you should ask that. It's gone. Okay, so that's.
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Yep, yeah. There you go. It's there, and then it's gone. So that was a quick run through. I mean, I'm sorry, I know that is really, really rapid. I can't remember how long it took. This is probably less than 15 minutes, maybe even less than that. But it gives you at least an idea of where I was trying to go with that. So questions, comments?
I think a lot of this will be having to go into whatever software we have. And like I've actually done nothing with what is it, the brush and stuff like that. So
right,
it's good to know where we have to look. Now go back to the book and actually do it.
Yeah, and I think, one of the challenges here is that as you work through an image, you think, oh, have I really made that much of a difference? But Lightroom, fortunately, has a little key. That's how the image started out.
Where is that?
Pardon?
How did you pull that up?
Oh, all I did was the before and after key in Lightroom.
Control?
No, it's actually, are you in Lightroom? Are you a Lightroom user?
Lightroom on a Mac.
Oh, okay. Then it's the / key just below the delete key. That's the original image as it came in. Now, it wasn't displaying those when we first did the image. It wasn't displaying the height, the over and unders, which is weird. This is being a little bit uncooperative this morning. So that's what I like to do, is let's go back and look at the image as it was before we started processing, and then by the time we've done it. And I think you'll agree that, it turns a somewhat mediocre image into, I'd be okay putting this out.
When you work on this, Graham, do you magnify the image a lot to see what you're doing?
Depends what you're doing. You can do. I mean, that's a personal preference thing, and we can change that up here. We can. I prefer generally to look at the whole of the image unless I'm sharpening. If I'm sharpening, I would always go to at least 100% and choose the bit that was most important to me. So if I wanted to sharpen, I would. Look at that. Look at that. We've got some little bits just over blowing out there. Good job you mentioned that, Mary.
I had two quick questions. So just to clarify, to toggle back and forth between the original and you just that below the delete.
The backslash.
Okay. And then when those reds and blues, did Lightroom pull those up?
It
to
does.
sort of like say, hey, look at this.
It's these little markers up here.
Oh,
And the
okay.
way you toggle those is the J key. You'd see them toggling on and off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the J key.
Huh.
So yeah,
Where am I going to find a list of those shortcuts?
well, so if you're a Lightroom user, there are a couple of places that I love. One is Lightroom Queen. She has a couple of, what do you call them? Cheat sheets that have all the keys on them, I think. She has a great forum. Highly recommend her book. The other ones, Michael Fry has a good processing class, particularly on landscape. Michael's a landscape photographer. Lightroom Queen is very generic, but she's very Q&A oriented. It's not a do this, do that. It's much more Q&A oriented, but
Okay.
they're good books. They're great books. And of course, always, Julianne Cost, K-O-S-T, is an Adobe evangelist. She's a great teacher and she has a lot of stuff online.
Great, thanks.
Highly recommended. Cool. All right. So let me see what happens here. That's not what I wanted to do. Thank you, Graham. Let's go back to here. Okay. Did it switch back?
Mhm.
Yes, I see all images.
Cool. All right. So I did do another one, which was this one. And I just wanted to show you. So we talked about negative clarity. I actually did that here. This was a flash shot, as you can see. And rather than go through all the steps, there we are. That's the before. And that's the after. So before, oh, that's interesting. Why is it not giving me the, how weird, it's not undoing the crop. But you can see the differences that I made, and particularly look at the face. The model's face is very shiny here. Negative clarity is what I used there to downplay that. And there are some things where you can never get rid of highlights. So the flash highlight on this young lady's ample bosom is never going to go away, because that's a, forgotten the name. Anyway, that one, let's just go back to here. All right, so how are we doing for time? I talk too much. So we're going to dismiss Betty's fabulous great blue heron image as being too good for today.
Graham,
yeah,
I just wanted to know if you'd cut the top off.
Well, I think that's a very subjective thing. You know, so many of the things we're talking about here. So let's just pull Betty's image up. Here we go. I would try it and see. I mean, for a lot of these things, let's just go in and let's choose it. And I'm going to play and see what I like. I'm also going to try and get the thirds, so we can change the overlays like this. There we go. I'm also going to want to try and get the PowerPoints and the power lines where I want my viewer to look. And I want my viewer to look generally, and you're going to see that's not going to work. I want the viewer to look here first. So, I mean, that would be one prop. I think it's okay. I think either works. I mean, this one is, you're in the nuance stages with this image. It's a great image. You know, I might want to selectively sharpen the head to make sure they go there first, and so on and so forth. But there's not much to do, in my view. Yeah. I mean, the cropping and the so on are subjective. But I wanted to, did that answer your question, Betty?
Yes, it does. That's exactly what I wanted to.
I mean, play.
Yeah.
I'm a great advocate of play and try a couple of different versions. And if you're a Lightroom user, it's really easy. You're just going to press the apostrophe key and it's going to give you multiple copies for each time you do that. And then you can process them as you wish. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about that. So, Tom. you're in the hot seat now. What were your thoughts on this one, Tom? What were you pondering? What were you thinking might be subject to improvement? Did Tom go?
There we go. Sorry.
That's okay.
I was standing at this, chatting with some people, and I saw that building. I thought, oh, look at that. Graham will have fun with this with his friend Mark.
Well, I think you chose a subject that we deliberately couldn't do that, but
that's all I was thinking. I just happened to think, oh, I wonder how he would level this photograph.
Well, that's a good point. So, I mean, my first observation would be that, of course, the thing that we're most interested in is almost the darkest thing in here. So we've got this huge bright area here that I think doesn't help. This guy I find very distracting. But mainly I would want to bring in the shadows. How far do I want to go with that? See, that brightened up everything. So looking at the big things first, I don't know what I'd want to do with the crop. So you wanted it level. Well, what does level mean here?
Exactly, that's what I thought.
You know, the trees are a good guide. The trees are a good guide. And part of its attraction is that it's not all square and tickety-boo, that, you know, there's some stuff going on here that makes it interesting. I think I would, personally, I would definitely take that guy out, because to me, this foreground is adding very little to the image. I would do that. And then yeah, see, I don't know what's going on back here. There's some, to me, distracting artifacting going on here. Do you see it? The little, we've got the red, the overexposure on, but see where it is. It's really distracting to me. I can't believe that the edges of these branches are actually like that in real life. That is, that they're brighter than the surrounding sky. But that's the implication of all these red dots. And I find that a bit off-putting. Let's just turn them off. Yeah. But the big thing I would do is really think about how I want to draw this out. So let's first of all fit it. I like it. It's got a very green cast to me. Does anybody agree? Too green? Would I change that? And I would change it with color temperature. Maybe just like that. I would definitely want to put a vignette on this at some stage. I might pull down the highlights a bit. Let's see what happens when we do that. And if we bung in a little bit of clarity, there we go. Do we see the difference that's happening there now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot more. Now, see, again, this is one where I would actually argue for not being lazy, and I would do that as a selection, I think. So let's just undo that. And we undo by double clicking. Come on. Well, we would if we had a sensitive pencil. We double click and it goes back to what it was before. So this is one where I would choose my brush. I would change my brush size, and I'd make sure that I've got auto mask turned on down here. And then what I would do is put on my mask. Whoa, this is this is really, there's something very odd happening here. Oh. Okay, it's not liking this. It really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
that's happening, and I haven't even got the pen. This is so delayed. Yeah, we're not gonna do that because it really isn't helping us. But I would go with, in general, the localized version. I'd paint that in here because I really don't want all the stuff that's happening up here. And if I wasn't trying to do this on a video cast, I would definitely select the hut and do the work that I want on the hut. But what are your thoughts, Tom?
Oh, I don't know. I just snapped that picture. I hadn't thought about it, but now that I'm looking at it, I wish I had widened out and caught the rest of this vine, the grapevine coming off that
This
goes
one?
off. Yeah, I wish I had included that and then moved the whole thing over to the right to show the contrast between the curvature of the vine and the linearity of the what you called hut.
Yeah, there's nothing there for us to get, is there, unfortunately? But yeah, I think that's a good idea. If we do that, it puts the hut on the third. It makes it a little bit better. This sky is not the best that I would like to see, and that's actually partly because we did the global stuff. And then if I'd done that crop and I'd left this little bit in here, I would want to go and fix that. Same here. A vignette would do that, some of it. Vignettes are really useful tools. But that sky is the biggest issue for me. Look what's happening now. So even just putting a modest vignette, there's something happening up here. Did you process the image, or is that straight out?
Oh no, I just shot it on the phone.
Okay, yeah,
Quickly.
Something odd happening in that sky. But those are the sorts of things that I would think about doing.
Turned it into something.
Yeah,
Looks great.
Yeah, it's better. But as soon as you push the clarity in, it's improving the hut tremendously, but it's messing up the background. And I don't know why my system is not responding well when we're on the Zoom.
So what you're doing there was local clarity.
That's what I was trying to do. Yeah. Clarity just pushed in all is global here as it is, but it's just to illustrate what changes in here for you.
And how do you do that? I mean, not that I don't use Lightroom, so.
Well, whatever your tool you use, you're going to have some sort of brush like this guy up here.
Yeah.
And then you choose you see the brush has now changed.
Yeah.
And the solid, the first inner circle is I'm not explaining this very lucidly. The gap between the first and the second, the outer circle, is the feather. Yeah, and so it'll feather off, but because I've got auto mask selected here, it would generally find these edges pretty well, and it does a good job of it, but clearly not here on Zoom. And then I would just apply that there, and then I can apply as many dots as I want. And so I would put my dot there. You see, we've got that's the center anchor. And here's the thing that impressed everybody. That was what impressed everybody when Lightroom came out.
What was that now? I'm sorry.
Just watch the, let's turn that off. Watch the little dot. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Okay, you can tell how easily amused I am. So the other two images that we got that I want to just have a quick crack at is this one's Betty's, I think. And this one, so I have a couple of points. This is a nice illustration of what happens when you haven't got a black point. So what do we see here? When we look at this, what would our observation be?
I can't find it.
Yeah, it washes out. It's hard to see the bird.
Right. So, but you know, and here's the thing, when we're looking at an overall image like this, there are plenty of blacks in here, but we haven't got a full black. We've got this gap here. And so we would want to move that. But before we do anything like that, this is one where I would crop. And I like to see my subject, you know, reasonably full in the frame for something like this. So I would want to maybe start about that. I want it to have room. So I want him looking into the space, as it were. So that'd be a good starting point. And now when we do this, we see a very different picture. We see that we've maybe lost the highlights up here. Let's pull that back. Is it going to do it? Okay. And that in itself, just pulling the highlights back has increased the contrast dramatically in the background. But we might need to do a little more. There we go. And this is helping us because the background is darkening. On this particular shot, I suspect we're not quite as sharp as we might want to be to keep it. But then as we push the blacks, there we go. Now we're starting to see a bit more contrast creep in. But look what's happening to the blacks here. We've got the spike and we've got the light on. But this is one where you look and you go, well, do I care about those blacks blocking up? And in general, my answer here would be not so much. I might play with it a little, but in general, I don't care that I can't see in here. I might if I printed it because it would give a horrible result in printing. But this is one where I would definitely be selecting here all around the bird. And then putting a little bit of mid clarity in. I might pull this the head back just a little more. But this exposure here is looking fine now. And if you look, you can always tell. So if you watch up here while I move, you see the numbers and it gives me a red, a green and a blue percentage. And up here, see, well, actually it's not blown out. Not as much as I would have expected it to be. It's only in the 80s, or 90, 92, 93. I'm generally aiming to get below 95% and for blacks above 5%. So here, there you go. So maybe 10% on the blacks. But that's in general what I would do. I would look, I mean, this is okay. I might decide that I want a little bit more or less on the crop at the bottom. But those are the sorts of things I would do. And then I would work the bird fairly assertively. I would have a good mask for the whole bird, including the tops of the legs, and it may be a separate one for the head. And you can see what your autofocus has done here, or your focus. It's tended to focus a little in front of where the head is, I would say.
Would you ever burn and dodge something like this?
Well, that's effectively what we're doing when we're doing these selective adjustments.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, we would come in and we would say, okay, and actually your dot doesn't need to be where you're going to do it, but I would, let's see if I can turn on my overlay. I would go in and do something like this. Oh, now it's behaving better than it was on that previous image. And I would want to just catch that. And of course, if you overcook this and you go outside the edges, then on Lightroom, pressing the Option key will remove. So I can paint it out. I can paint it in, or I can, if I do this, oh, whoops, don't want that. You see how the X in the middle is changing to a minus? And now I can brush it out. Because I obviously, see, now it's going haywire again. It doesn't keep up well. Come on. There we go. Now it's back. So I would do that. I would then turn off my overlay once I finish that. And then I would pull those highlights back quite a bit. Maybe even the whites on the head. There we go. You see the difference that's coming in? But we're also getting some artifacting down here. So you've got to be really careful. And then when I was done, I would click that. And of course, my little selection point clicks off. So those are the sorts of things that I would think about. Betty, any thought?
Okay, yeah, actually, I played with it myself, and I ended up, because I don't have the going in on the little detail that you can do, I just ended up adding some warmth to the rocks so the bird would stand out more.
Right.
But I just took lots of pictures of what you were doing, so I can go back and take a look at playing with it. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure. Okay, let's, we have another one here that I want to try and take a look at, and we're getting, okay, I don't remember who sent me this one.
That's mine, Susan.
Okay, Susan, talk to me. What did you have in mind? What do you think?
No, well, I guess I was trying to get the rain and the spider web. I liked the way it looked.
Yep.
So I kind of got that shot, but I also, I don't know what you think, just probably a lot of other stuff in here too.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is a really interesting image because it's hard. Because the things that you want to emphasize all the things here, and they're really hard. You can't pick them out. The detail is so fine in here. But in general, I would have thought that adding some mid-tone, let's put it in develop first. Okay, there we go. I would have thought that putting some mid-tone contrast in here would be a good thought. We could probably get a bit more into the blacks, just to push that contrast a little bit. There we go, just a touch like that. And then I want to really be trying the clarity. How does that help us? Not bad. That would work. But what else would we like? We don't like these little bits, so I would want to come in with a spot removal, make my brush the right size, and then here's one of the beauties of Lightroom. It's done. The other thing we can do is, if you think you've got sensor spots or craps, the T key puts this little toolbar down here, and it's a toggle. And then I can click that visualize spots. Now, this is not the best of images for that, but I can look and see, it really shows me what I don't like that. And I don't like that. Cool. All right. That's really useful if you've got center dust. It'll put it up in an instant. Yeah.
That's what I was confused when I was trying to do some spot removal, was that you get the two circles and the line between them. And I couldn't control where the circle that I wanted the color copied to the place I was correcting. It just seemed to go its own place.
Well, it does, because it tries to be smart for you. It thinks for you. And so as long as you've got it selected, you can pick this second dot up and put it wherever you want.
Look at that.
Now, I'm sorry, it's going haywire again. Come on. Oh, give over. Okay, let's get rid of that. So the other thing you can do, of course, is you can, in general, you can move the target, you can move the source. And this is a really poor example. In fact, what I'm going to do is delete that one. There we go. And then we're going to do it again. No, we're not. Come on, back to ground. And then we're just going to do that. And it's going to choose what it thinks is the best bet. It tries to do a match, but if you don't like it, you can move it. And it's not always that smart. There we go. See that? I don't know what that one was. Let's get rid of it. And you can just press the delete key just to have it go. So those are there. It is adjustable, and if you're doing it literally a spot, you can adjust the size of the spot too. So let's see if we can find something more. Well, okay, you can just do a spot like that, and then I can grab the. No, it's not what I wanted. Go away. It's not reacting well, but
It's
you
the
can,
bracket. It's the bracket key.
well, you can use the bracket key too. That's true. But that is adjusting only my brush. It's not going to adjust the one here. What I'm trying to do is grab the one here and stretch it. It should. There we. I can move it, but I should. Yeah, I'm getting really poor responses here. I'm miles away from the. Okay. Anyway, you get my drift. You should be able to change the size of that circle by grabbing it on the outside edge for an extant point and moving it, dragging it outwards. What else would I do to this? Not a lot, I don't think. I mean, now I think let's do the before and after. So there's your before, there's your after, before, after. So pushing in that contrast also darkened the background, which helps us because it makes the subject that we want stand out. I might crop it a little differently. I'm unsure. Thoughts?
It's a lot of info, but it's really helpful.
There's a lot to learn. Lightroom is a fabulous. We're barely touching the basics here. Excuse me. But in principle, I'm looking at where we are on time. So I think we're probably getting pretty close to where we should call it a day for now. There's a lot there. I'm sorry, I didn't realize how unresponsive it was going to be when I was trying to do things in Zoom. In the past, I have captured screens and then replayed the video, and that actually might be a better bet in future.
Can you also send a copy of the PowerPoint presentation to Bill and he can send it out to all of us?
Yeah, sure. There'll be a small fee of $5 each. So,
Okay.
yeah,
It's been worth it. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
It was very kind of you to take the time to develop this, and it was excellent. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. It really, in my mind, this turns us into being image makers because we're taking what looks, and often it's an image that looks okay when you start, but then by the time you've really gone through and thought about it and processed it, and particularly when you do that before and after direct comparison, the little nuance changes really make a difference. They're a big deal.
Yes, thank you very, very much.
I would really encourage everybody to try.
Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I
Hey,
say,
Graham,
sorry,
could
it's
you
less,
take,
it's, sorry, Tom, let me just ask Beth a question,
Sure.
okay? Beth, are you still there?
She is, but she's muted.
Yes,
There we go.
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I also just use an iPhone for photography and I'd love to get together with you, but I don't have your email address or a way to contact you.
I don't have yours either.
Right, but
I
Bill,
can get it to you.
Bill can do the intros.
Bill, will you be a matchmaker for us?
I will.
All right.
all right, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay, Tom, you had
that'd
a
be cool.
Yeah, on the going back to RAW and what do you do in RAW? Okay, I use Affinity, so I have this thing they call personas. So you start in RAW.
Yep.
Well, I can do everything in the develop. I can do everything in the develop. No, I can do everything in my main processing thing that I can do in RAW. So why do I do it in RAW before I do it in the other thing? I can't remember the name of it.
That's also true of Photoshop. There's a RAW processor. So it turns out that they're just different ways of looking at the same tool. So Lightroom's processing engine, Adobe's RAW processor, that is a front end to Photoshop are exactly the same tool. You're just getting a different way to look at the tool, to deal with it. And you could do it all in raw processing. I know people who use Camera Raw as their processing engine.
Mhm.
You can do that.
Uh-huh. It seemed like the way that I've been doing it is that I've been just making the subtle changes in RAW, and then more extreme things in the main. God, I can't remember the name of the stupid thing. Sorry.
Meaning in the develop module, or the equivalent of develop?
Right, the develop module is the first thing that I use. I put my raw thing in there, I develop it.
Right.
And I just make very minor changes in that format, and then do the major things in the main processing thing.
I mean, you know, my take would be is whatever works for you. And your workflow develops over time. I mean, mine's changed tremendously. You know, I'll find something new or something will change, and it's whatever works for you. I take all of these things as a suggestion or as a structure that I build my own workflow around.
Well, anyway, my question wasn't very sharp, but anyway, thanks very much.
That's okay. Anything else from
Do you,
folks?
do you do all your edits on the raw image? Is that where the edits take place?
Well, so I mean, that's like a bit of a trick question. I mean, it's a meta editor, and you remember what we talked about. You're never changing your original file ever.
But I mean, you're bringing it in as raw, not as JPEG or TIFF.
Well, you import the raw, but then Lightroom has to build that visualization for you, because remember, it's undeveloped and it's still sitting on the disk, untouched and undeveloped. What Lightroom does is say, okay, I'll display this to you, and then remember the overhead projector thing. So we're never physically changing the original. That's true even when it's a JPEG, by the way. It's those layers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you're using an enlarger and you put the negative, right? And then you play with how the light comes through as to how it, makes an imprint on the paper, on the photographed paper. Yeah.
Right. And that's what I call baking. Now, the only difference is that if you're in a Lightroom, of course, it's really hard to duplicate that dodging and burning or to change it. Yeah. You can, but it's really hard. And so if you go and look at those of us who worked in workshops and were precise, this is not me, used to have a notebook with all the changes and exactly what they'd done. So if you go and look at Ansel Adams' prints, you can see how he evolved his prints just from the instructions that he recorded at the time, over time. So, but yeah, so the question is, you know, am I working on a raw? That's the basis of it, but I'm not changing it. I'm really doing all of these changes, and then I'm baking it when I push it out to a JPEG or to a print or to a TIFF, or exporting it, you know, to some whatever form I need. Did that answer your question? Photos, by the way, Photos on the Mac and in the iPhone is a meta editor too.
You guys want to see where I am?
Where are you?
Can you even see?
Oh, we hate you.
Oh, wow.
We're not talking to you anymore. Where are you?
Hello? Where is he?
Where are you?
Colorado. And that's the second snowstorm in a week.
There you go. Serves you right. We have no sympathy. All right, folks. Anything else? Are we done?
Thank
you very, very much.
Go on, practice. Practice. All right, folks. We'll see you next week.
See you next
Great.
time.
Thanks.
Thank you.